And to talk about more on the repatriation issues, we have invited a guest to our studios. The Ministry of Foreign Relations is denying social media reports that 2 Sri Lankan migrant workers in Kuwait have taken their own lives. It says that there have been 2 recent suicides of migrant workers, but they were from the Philippines and India. Calls of repatriations from Sri Lankans living abroad intensified recently in the backdrop of COVID-19, and the government has been working towards ensuring their return. And the topic has gained further momentum with a considerable number of recent returnees testing positive for coronavirus. Now, to talk about the subject of repatriation, I have with me here in our studios Acting Director General on Overseas Sri Lankans at the Ministry of Foreign Relations, Anzul Jhan, who is here with me in studio. Good evening. Thank you for joining us, Anzul.
Good evening, Indveri.
I think we just saw the President also talking about the question of Sri Lankans returning to Sri Lanka, but you are overseeing the Contact Sri Lanka portal. You see what our Sri Lankan expatriates want. What is your observation?
We see 48,100 desperate Sri Lankans wanting to come back to Sri Lanka because most of them have run out their funds and without job, some of them have been terminated.
Right.
And they are desperate that they need to get back because although our embassies have tried to talk to the employees, some of those companies are closing and therefore they have no other way but to return home.
There are many Sri Lankans whose visas have expired and these countries do not wish to extend them. What kind of mediation and intervention will Sri Lanka's Foreign Ministry do? Will you be exploiting all possible diplomatic channels and avenues to work out something for Sri Lankans?
Our embassies have already contacted the host countries and they are in discussion, and most of the countries have extended the visas till repatriation takes place, but some of the countries have not reciprocated that kind of extension of visas. So most of the some will have to pay penalties because they have been working without a visa for a long time.
Right.
And even those people are more vulnerable and they want to come back, and this is going to be a real problem for those who are without visas.
So does this mean there is an expedited process here in place?
With regard to
the repatriation of Sri Lankans and also sorting out their questions, their concerns, especially as you said, they are in a very vulnerable state, as you say.
Absolutely. Now, when we look at the Contact Sri Lanka portal, we see that there are issues what they are going through. Some of those Sri Lankans had just finished their contract and they have sold all their belongings and they were ready to board the flight. And they are one of the most vulnerable categories. And some of these Sri Lankans are already on the streets and they don't have any shelter and they don't have food. So these are the vulnerable categories in the Middle East among the migrant workers.
How does the Foreign Ministry look at the recent influx of migrant workers who test positive for COVID-19? The President just a short while ago, as we started this bulletin, we spoke about his stance on PCR tests and how that procedure should continue. But how is the Foreign Ministry looking at this, now, especially with a lot of discussion within the country about foreign arrivals, expatriates returning?
I think this discussion started with the Kuwait numbers. Now, if you look at out of the 466, 379 have been identified as positive. But this is a unique situation where they were in a camp, they were put in the camp on between 21st and 25th of April, and they were only repatriated on the 19th of May. So it's almost 1 month. So they have been vulnerable for that 1 month, and it's a unique case. And we should not look at it as the yardstick to measure everyone who are outside. we have to look at it as a unique situation, and vulnerability is all over, and it can happen to anyone. And
so
the Middle East is like over the media.
Right.
This is the particular incident that has been repeatedly said over and over again, and Foreign Ministry takes the unique position that it's only a one-off incident,
Right.
and all those who are coming from all the flights, only very few have been identified as positive, and that doesn't mean the whole of Middle East is affected. And they will test positive.
Again, when the Foreign Ministry considers for repatriation Sri Lankans, what is the process? I'd like to know, because you see all the grievances of our expatriate community, and that this is a very emotional situation also about our countrymen. But again, there must be a process that you deal with. Who do you give preference to? Is it to the high risk community, or is it to those who are tested positive or who may be vulnerable, or to those who have lost their employment, or the kind of groups who have not been able to extend their visa?
Now, we have not looked at those who have shown that they are positive, because that has not come into the discussion, because nobody is telling us that they are positive. Now, we choose the vulnerable categories based on where they are located and to which category they belong to. Now, we have 5 categories, like student category, the short term, the migrant workers who have lost their jobs,
Right.
and who are vulnerable. And when we say migrant workers, it need not be in the Middle East itself. It can be faraway place, as in Turks and Caicos, to Fiji, to Papua New Guinea.
Right.
So all those Sri Lankans who are outside working are considered as migrant workers. And if they have lost their jobs, then they are in the vulnerable sector.
Right. And will there be a proactive measure again once, this is a post-COVID question. Obviously, our Sri Lankans, they account for most of our foreign revenue, especially from the Middle East, the expatriate community, the workers' remittances. So we need that coming in too, post-COVID, regardless of what the situation is going to be. But what are we looking at? Will the Foreign Ministry mediate in finding them a safer and more easier way to return back to where they have been employed?
You have to look at this in the background of what the countries will be doing after post-COVID, because each country will take measures as to protect their economy and how to go about. They will have their own plans. Then our ambassadors will have to negotiate with those countries whether it's going to be a quota system or whether it's as business as usual, that anybody can go and get a job when there is an offer. So ambassadors will be working hard on finding avenues and opportunities for our Sri Lankans abroad, keeping in mind that there will be other developments in the same front where jobs are concerned, because there will be a competition. There will be a lot of people who had gone back from Philippines to India to Pakistan to all the other countries. They will be vying for all these jobs, and we will have to take special care to ensure that these opportunities are also got for these Sri Lankans.
So are we sending a message of reassurance to our Sri Lankans outside that their requests will be considered in due time?
Yes, the Foreign Ministry from the inception has been working towards some form of a repatriation. As soon as the airports were closed and the government was trying to stabilize what is happening inside the country, the Foreign Ministry was looking outward and trying to figure out how we are going to get the Sri Lankans back home, especially the vulnerable sectors. That's the very reason we put out the Contact Sri Lanka portal just 1 week after the airport was closed. So we had a idea as to where are these Sri Lankans spread and what are their issues and how best we can help them.
Right. Thank you very much, Anzul, for joining us and for discussing and for taking up the issue of overseas Sri Lankans. Anzul Jhan, Acting Director General for Overseas Sri Lankans of the Ministry of Foreign Affairs. She's also in charge of the Contact Sri Lanka portal set up by the Foreign Ministry for Sri Lankans living overseas to get in touch with Sri Lankan missions as well as the Foreign Ministry.